He didn't say, "I'm sorry you lost your job." He didn't even say, "We'll get through this." 3 days into my unemployment, my husband slid a document across our marble table. Its title wasn't about divorce, it was a cold corporate calculation, marriage partnership dissolution agreement. In a single moment, I wasn't his wife anymore. I was a failed asset he was liquidating on a 50/50th split, but he made one mistake. He handed me the pen to sign it. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're tuning in from. We love seeing how our stories connect people from all around the world. Your comments and thoughts bring this community to life, and we're so grateful to have you on this journey with us. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a cozy seat, maybe a cup of coffee or tea, and prepare yourself for a tale that will captivate your heart from beginning to end. Let's begin. My name is Amelia, and for 8 years, my life's most valuable acquisition was my husband. Then, one Tuesday morning, I became a liability he was ready to write off. He didn't say, "I'm sorry you lost your job." He didn't even say, "We'll get through this." 3 days into my unemployment, my husband Richard slid a document across our marble table. Its title wasn't about divorce, it was a cold corporate calculation, marriage partnership dissolution agreement. In a single moment, I wasn't his wife anymore. I was a failed asset he was liquidating on a 50/50th split. But he made one mistake. He handed me the pen to sign it. The silence in our glass-walled penthouse was absolute, broken only by the faint, automated hum of the air purifier. It was a sound Richard had chosen, optimized for its low decibel rating. Everything in our life was optimized, from the algorithm that selected our morning news to the precise temperature of the water for his pour-over coffee. Our world was a testament to his obsession with efficiency. For 8 years, I had thought of it as a shared project, a life curated with care. Now, I saw it for what it was: his system, and I was the component that had just failed. "Sign here," Richard said, his voice as neutral as if he were closing a funding round. He tapped a manicured finger on the signature line. The document was thick, its pages filled with subsections and clauses that itemized our shared existence into a series of financial transactions. Rent, utilities, groceries, even a section on shared space amortization. He had turned our marriage into a spreadsheet while I was still mourning the career I had loved. I had been a senior specialist at the auction house, an art historian whose job was to trace the life of an object, to uncover its provenance. I found the stories behind the canvas, the secrets held in a sculptor's mark. It was a skill I had brought into our marriage, helping Richard select art that told a story of power and taste, hosting dinners where my knowledge of a painter's history charmed investors more than any pitch deck could. All of it, I had believed, was love. Now, it felt like unpaid consulting work he was retroactively dismissing. "You had your lawyer draw this up without talking to me?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. I flipped through the pages, my professional eye catching the legalese, the carefully constructed loopholes designed to protect him. "I wanted to have a framework ready," he replied, adjusting the cuff of his bespoke shirt. "It's more efficient this way." Efficiency. That was Richard's god. It made him a brilliant tech CEO and a terrible human being. My eyes fell on the pen he had placed in front of me. It was a beautiful vintage fountain pen, one I didn't recognize. As my fingers closed around its cool, weighted barrel, I felt something my years of handling delicate artifacts had trained me to notice: a small, almost invisible irregularity near the nib. I tilted it slightly in the morning light that streamed through our floor-to-ceiling windows. It wasn't a maker's mark, it was a tiny, intricate engraving of two initials, intertwined CV. Chloe Vance, his new 28-year-old chief strategy officer, the woman he described as a disruptive thinker. I suddenly understood the late-night strategy sessions, the weekend work trips. The pen wasn't a tool for a transaction. It was evidence of a betrayal that had started long before I lost my job. My unemployment wasn't the cause of this. It was just the excuse he'd been waiting for. I looked up at him, and for the first time in years, I saw him clearly. Not the brilliant, driven man I had moved from London for, but a stranger whose heart was run by an algorithm of self-interest. A cold wave of clarity washed over me, extinguishing the last embers of my grief. This wasn't the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of a very specific, very detailed project. I uncapped the pen, Chloe's pen, and signed my name with a steady hand. "All right, Richard," I said, sliding the document back to him. "Equal partners?" He smiled, a tight, satisfied curl of his lips, already turning back to his phone, already moving on to the next item on his agenda. He didn't see me take a picture of the initials on the pen. He didn't see the art historian in me awaken, the part of my mind that lived to uncover the hidden story, to trace the provenance of a lie. He thought he was closing a deal. He had no idea he had just commissioned a masterpiece of his own destruction. That night, I didn't cry. I worked, in the silent blue-white glow of my laptop. I started a new file, giving it a title that made a bitter smile touch my lips: The Provenance of a Marriage. If Richard wanted to run our life like a business, then I would conduct the most thorough due diligence he had ever seen. My first act was not to fight his rules, but to embrace them with a terrifying precision. The next morning, I presented him with my own addendum to his agreement, a single page I'd titled Domestic Asset Management. It was a schedule for the use of shared spaces and resources, broken down into hourly slots. "My time in the home gym is from 6 to 7 a.m., I explained, pointing to the color-coded chart. "Yours is from 7 to 8. The kitchen is a shared asset, so usage will be logged to ensure equitable distribution of utility costs." He stared at me, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes, but he couldn't argue. I was using his own logic against him. The war began not with a shout, but with the quiet tyranny of a shared calendar. While he was busy navigating his newly complicated domestic schedule, I dove into our finances. For years, I had trusted him implicitly, letting him handle the complex web of investments and accounts. Now, I approached it like a painting with a questionable history. I started with the obvious, tracing the flow of money from our joint accounts. It was all clean, too clean. Then I remembered the pen. The betrayal wasn't in our shared life. It was in the one he kept hidden. I focused on his business expenses, the corporate card statements I had access to as his wife, and there it was, a monthly payment of $10,000 every month for the last 6 months, to a consulting firm I'd never heard of, Synergy Innovations LLC. The name was so generic, so perfectly corporate, that it screamed shell company. A quick search confirmed it. Synergy Innovations was registered to a P.O. box, had no website and no digital footprint. It was a ghost. I knew I had found the thread, but I needed to know where it led. I couldn't access the company's internal records, not without raising alarms. I needed an ally, someone on the inside, or at least someone with a vested interest in the truth. My thoughts immediately went to Isabel, Richard's aunt. She wasn't a warm, maternal figure. She was a legend in the venture capital world, a shrewd investor who had provided the seed money for Richard's company through her family's fund. She valued 2 things above all else: legacy and return on investment. I scheduled a meeting with her under the pretense of discussing the disposition of some family art. We met at a private club, the kind of place where fortunes were made and lost over hushed conversations and overpriced salads. She was exactly as I remembered: elegant, intimidating, her eyes missing nothing. "Amelia," she said, her voice crisp, "you look tired. I was sorry to hear about your position at the auction house." It was the closest she would ever come to expressing sympathy. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Isabel, I'm here because I'm concerned about a potential security vulnerability at Richard's company." I saw her posture shift, her attention sharpening. I had used the right language. I wasn't a scorned wife, I was a risk analyst. I laid it out for her calmly, presenting my findings on Synergy Innovations not as evidence of an affair, but as an unexplained financial drain, a recurring payment to an unverifiable entity. It's a liability, I said, an anomaly in the books that could be problematic for investors during the next round of due diligence. She listened without interruption, her fingers steepled. She didn't ask about Richard and me. She didn't care about our marriage. She cared about her investment when I was finished. She was silent for a long moment. Richard has always been ambitious, she said finally, a statement that was both a compliment and a warning. He sometimes moves too quickly. She wasn't going to hand me the keys to the kingdom. I knew that, but she saw the risk I represented, and the greater risk Richard might be. I can't give you access to company files. Amelia, that would be improper, she said, taking a sip of water. But I will say this. Richard made a mistake when he let Mark Ellison go 6 months ago. He said Mark wasn't adapting to the new company culture. I think Mark was simply too meticulous for Richard's taste. She paused, her eyes meeting mine. A good provenance researcher always speaks to the people who were there when the story changed. It was all I needed. Mark Ellison, the former chief financial officer, the man Richard had fired. I found him working for a small accounting firm in the suburbs, a significant step down from his former life. He was bitter, but he was also a man of integrity, and he was afraid. Richard had made him sign a formidable non-disclosure agreement. I met him at a quiet coffee shop, far from the city. I didn't pressure him. I simply laid out the facts I had, the payments to Synergy Innovations. I told him I was just trying to understand the full financial picture of my marriage. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the desire to speak warring with the fear of legal retribution. He ruined my reputation, Mark said quietly, stirring his coffee. Said I was a dinosaur that I couldn't keep up. Then he looked at me and saw not a CEO's wife, but another person whose value had been casually dismissed by Richard. The NDA is ironclad, he said, but it doesn't cover illegal activities, and what he was doing, it was walking a very fine line. He told me everything. The fake invoices for strategic consulting from Synergy Innovations, the way Richard had instructed him to code the expenses as research and development. It was exactly what I had suspected. But then he revealed something far worse. It wasn't just about the money for his girlfriend, Mark said, his voice dropping. It was bigger. Look up the acquisition of the sculpture for the office lobby, the catalyst. I remembered it. A massive, abstract steel sculpture Richard had purchased for $250,000. A piece he claimed represented the company's disruptive spirit. He bought it through the Synergy Innovations, Mark explained. He used company funds, funneled through the Shell Corporation to buy an asset. Then, he had that asset independently appraised at twice its purchase price and added it to the company's balance sheet. My blood ran cold. He's inflating the company's valuation, I whispered. Mark nodded. He's getting ready for a new round of funding. He's not just cheating on you. Amelia, he's about to commit fraud against all of his investors. I left that coffee shop with a purpose so sharp, it felt like a weapon. This was no longer just about a broken heart or a humiliating contract. Richard was building a house of cards, and he was about to sell it to his own family and partners for a fortune. My provenance report took on a new urgency. I spent the next week locked in my home office, cross-referencing Mark's information with every document I could find. I wrote up his testimony, got him to sign it in front of a notary, and packaged it with the financial trail, creating an airtight case. The final piece was my own contribution, the part of the report titled, Valuation of Uncompensated Brand and Network Development. I meticulously documented every dinner party, every investor I'd charmed, every piece of art I'd sourced, assigning a fair market consulting fee to every hour. The total came to just over $300,000. It wasn't about the money. It was about translating my worth into the only language Richard understood. The company's quarterly board meeting was scheduled for the following Friday. That was my deadline. This wouldn't be a messy, public confrontation at a charity gala. The execution had to be as quiet, precise, and devastating as the system Richard himself had built. 1 hour before the meeting was scheduled to begin, I sat at my desk, my heart beating a steady, determined rhythm. I attached the completed report to an encrypted email. The subject line was simple: Urgent due diligence report regarding Petong Corp. I sent it to every member of the board, including Isabel. Then I waited. I imagined the scene in that sterile boardroom on the 40th floor. Richard, confident and smiling, ready to present his inflated growth figures. I pictured the moment the first board member's phone would light up, then another and another. I saw them opening the file, their expressions shifting from curiosity to shock, to cold, hard anger as they read my meticulously documented report. Richard walked into that meeting expecting a victory lap. Instead, he walked into his own execution. He was met with a wall of silence. No one looked at him. They were all staring at their tablets, at the story I had laid bare. It was Isabel who spoke first, her voice cutting through the tension like glass. "Richard," she said, not looking up from her screen, "perhaps before we review the quarterly numbers, you could enlighten us on the operational purpose of a company called Synergy Innovations." There was no shouting, no dramatic accusations, just the quiet, clinical dismantling of a man by his own peers. His defense crumbled under the weight of the evidence I had provided. His explanations were met with cold, analytical questions. They didn't care about his affair with Chloe. They cared about the fact that he had lied to them, that he had put their money and their reputations at risk. He wasn't a philandering husband in that room. He was a failed CEO, a bad investment. The silence that followed was his verdict. The fallout was swift and silent. To avoid a public scandal that would decimate the company, the board offered Richard a deal. He would resign immediately, citing personal reasons. He would sell his controlling shares back to the family fund at a fraction of their inflated value, effectively erasing his financial stake in the company he had built. In exchange, they would handle the fallout internally and not press criminal charges. My own divorce was equally efficient. Faced with the undeniable evidence of financial deception, a clear violation of our prenuptial agreement, Richard's lawyer advised him to settle immediately. There was no fight left in him. I received a cash settlement that was substantial enough to secure my future, and I was given sole ownership of the penthouse. It was a silent admission of everything he had done. I made him sign the final papers with his own pen, the one with his initials, not hers. The first thing I did was sell the penthouse. I couldn't stand the hum of its automated systems, the memory of its cold, marble surfaces. I took the proceeds from that sale, combined with my settlement, and started something new. I called it the Provenance Project. It wasn't a consulting firm for the wealthy, but a foundation. Its mission was to provide pro bono legal and forensic accounting services to women navigating divorces where their financial contributions had been hidden, devalued, or erased. I used my skills not to value objects, but to restore value to people's lives. 6 months later, I was at a small gallery in Chelsea, hosting the first fundraising event for the foundation. I was surrounded by art that was vibrant and alive, by women whose stories of resilience echoed my own. My phone buzzed with a news alert. It was an article in the Wall Street Journal about the remarkable turnaround of a tech company, now under new leadership and a new name, after the quiet departure of its founder. The article lauded the new CEO for bringing a new era of transparency and sustainable growth. Richard's name was mentioned only once, a footnote in the history of the company he had created and lost. He hadn't been destroyed in a blaze of glory. He had simply been revised, redacted, and ultimately forgotten. I put my phone away and looked around the room, at the future I was building. I understood then that Richard had taught me a valuable lesson. Everything and everyone has a provenance, a story of where they came from, what they've endured, and how they acquired their value. He had tried to write me out of my own story, to reduce my history to a single final transaction. But the best revenge wasn't in ending his story. It was in starting my own. And this time, I would be the one to determine its worth.